What you have told me so far, David, has been very interesting, and I am sure will be of great benefit to all who read your story. So can we go back to your mission work while you were in the Philippines, in December 2002? As I understand that you wrote to Mr. Jain, one of your principal trustees, and others to inform them of the work you were doing in the Philippines, and that you requested some help?
Yes, that's right. I not only wrote to him but also to Mr. Ramsbottom, requesting the home address of Mr. Crane, our church overseer. I wanted confirmation for the Philippine authorities regarding information about my membership and being sent to preach by the Burton Church. I needed this for my application for a missionary visa. Look, I recorded Mr. Jain's reply to my letter in one of my books, Before the Cock Crows, published in the Philippines on the 11th of February 2003.
Did you get the confirmation that you wanted?
Yes, I did, at a later date. However, when I wrote to Mr. Jain in his reply, he did not inform me of the closure of the Burton Chapel.
I understand, David, that on your return from mission work in the Philippines in June 2003, you spoke to Mr. Crane and he informed you that the chapel had been closed in December 2002, and that the Association of Grace Baptists had taken over the chapel. And he also suggested to you that you return to Burton and reopen the chapel.
Yes, that is right. One of the first things I did was to contact the association with the request to use the chapel. I had 3 Filipino pastors who were strict and particular Baptists, old school, just like us at Burton. These were due to arrive in the UK and preach in some of our churches, and we wanted to make use of the chapel during their 3-month stay here in the UK.
Members of the Trojan Horse.
3 men been appointed today to Chairman of the Board of Directors of Trojan Horse International to take the gospel to the whole world, including those in jail.
I'm Elder Ronaldo L. Lopez, the Baptist Church of God in Muntinlupa. Okay. And we are inviting you, people of England, to visit us, the remnant of the particular street Baptist in the Philippines.
I am Elder Manuel Riva of Primitive Baptist Church, Santa Rosa, Laguna. I'm here with the 1644 Confession of Faith.
Yeah, my name is Elder Conrado M. Quinto from Primitive Baptist Church of Christ in Caloocan. By doctrine, I am strict and particular Baptist, so holding a sovereign grace doctrine that God saved the soul unaided and alone by His true sovereign grace.
It was then that I paid a visit to Mr. Jain and Mr. King and then the chapel.
Really? You can tell me about their visit later, but before that, what was the response of the association?
They refused to give me permission when I asked them to allow us to use the chapel. I was shocked.
So what did you think, and what did you do?
When I went to the chapel, I noticed that it had been stripped of its furniture, and all the internal walls had been removed, as though building work was being carried out.
Is that so? Well, what did you think or feel about that?
I asked the lawful trustees, Mr. Jain and Mr. King, what had happened. Both Mr. Jain and Mr. King said that they were too old to deal with the chapel affairs, that the title deed and church documents were with the solicitor of Miss Gwen Ellis. He said that the indenture and title deed were very difficult to read and understand, but the Association of Grace Baptist Churches were professional men and they offered to take on the responsibility of the chapel.
Is that so? Well, what did you think or feel about that?
Well, first of all, I felt anxious because I had a copy of the indenture and realized that only the church could elect new trustees. When speaking to Mr. King, he made it known that he was aware that he could have registered the title deed in his own name as a sole trustee, but he said he was too old. That was why they were willing to give the title deed of the Burton Church to the association and let them deal with the chapel and church assets. I realized I must take the matter up with the association.
So where did that leave you? What did you conclude and what did you do?
Well, I then had reason to question the veracity and sincerity of the association, because they were duty-bound to look after the interests of the founding members of the church and preserve the use of the chapel for its intended purpose. They did not appear to be doing that.
Oh really, can you explain that, and why that was your conclusion?
Well, yes I can. I was alive and my ministry in the Philippines and England was the direct result of my being sent by the Burton Church to preach the gospel in 1982. That commission was to preach wherever the Lord opened the door. That was what I was doing. Mr. King, a church member just in the same way as I was, and trustee, along with Mr. Jane and Mr. Baumber and Martin, were all aware of my position and that I wished to return to Burton and reopen the chapel. They knew that we were a gospel standard church and they had a copy of my Burton Crisis. At that time very few people knew of the mission work that we had accomplished in the Philippines, but all of that is recorded in Trojan Warriors. I also had given a copy of the book to Mr. Jane in 2003, so he knew. The book clearly shows that our articles of religion, as an incorporation, were those of the Burton Church, of which I was a member.
Yes, I see, so you must have felt ignored and rejected and not considered?
Yes, rightly observed, because Mr. Jane knew of the intended visit of my Filipino strict Baptist pastors, and our work in the Philippines. He had written to me whilst in the Philippines to say neither he or his pastor Mr. Rhymes were in the position to help. I felt some animosity from Mr. Jane and he was reluctant to help resolve the matter. In his letter to me whilst in the Philippines, Mr. Jane never said a word about the closure of the chapel, or the death of Miss Gwen Ellis. He just said he had discussed my request for help with his pastor Mr. Rhymes, and they were unable to help me.
Oh really, what else did Mr. Jane say to you about anything else?
When I spoke to him about the chapel on my return, he informed me that he had changed his doctrinal position. Also that they were no longer a gospel standard church and had adopted the same doctrinal confession as the Association of Grace Baptist Churches. I also learned that Mr. Martin no longer supported our gospel standard position as a church.
You say that your communications to the association began to be ignored, so how did you feel?
I felt that the association's conduct in this whole affair was far from satisfactory. I would have expected at least to have been invited to their board of trustees to discuss with them the whole matter. I believed it was their duty, if they were faithful trustees, in order to ensure that the wishes of the founding members of the Burton Church were carried out. They did not seem at all interested in that at all. I think what had happened was that they had rushed into making a decision to capitalize on the Burton Chapel to make money for themselves. They had carried out internal work immediately on the closure of the chapel. They applied for planning permission to convert the chapel into a 3-dwelling apartment. They should have waited for a set period to elapse, as that was specified in the indenture, and I think it is a requirement according to the Charities Commission, before such work or plans were executed. They had gone ahead despite the fact that Mr. Jane had brought this to their attention. They had spent money in building work, design and planning applications. Then I came along, at the last minute, and called a halt to their plans. This is just one example of David Whitemarsh's ignorance of the law and his responsibility.
Well, David, I can fully understand how you felt let down by the association and your need to correct the matter, so tell me what you did.
Well, I told them that I was a member of the church despite my secession, in just the same way as Mr. King was after his secession. I asked them to confirm that the copy of the indenture and title deed that I had in my possession were one and the same as the one they held and had recovered from Miss Ellis's solicitor.
So what did they do?
They said the title deed was too fragile to photocopy and then continued to ignore me.
Really? How did you feel?
I was very angry. So I sent them a copy of my book, The Burton Crisis, which clearly confirmed all that I had said. All the legal trustees had a copy as I had sent it to them in 1984. There was no excuse for ignorance.
So how did the association respond?
They denied that we were a gospel standard church and started that my membership had been terminated. that I had no lawful claim to the church title deed of or chapel.
Really? So what did you do then?
I asked Mr. Ramsbottom to confirm, in writing, that we were a gospel standard cause, and asked Mr. Crane to confirm that I was an honourable member of the church, and that he had personally suggested that I return to reopen the Burton Chapel.
That sounds like a reasonable thing to do. So did Mr. Ramsbottom and Mr. Crane confirm the same in writing?
Yes, they did, and I was thankful for that, and submitted them to the association.
Well, that should have changed things, but did it?
No, I was ignored yet again. So what did you do next? In order to confirm to the association that all I had said to them was true, I referred them to the appropriate sections in my book, The Burton Crisis. It needs to be remembered that all the trustees had a copy of this book, in 1984, as I had sent it to them personally. I expected that would have been enough, but no, I was ignored. It seemed as though they were hardening their hearts toward me, and were refusing to listen.
Well, I can really understand how frustrated you were with Mr. Whitemarsh and the association. So what did you do next?
I then placed a caution with the land registry against the first registration of the Burton land title. This was to prevent them from registering the title deed in their name. My claim was that I was the sole remaining church member, and that the association had obtained the deeds inappropriately. The caution is still there, with all the details, and can be looked into. I was advised that it was a police matter and I should report it to the police.
Well, did you do that?
No, I waited to see what would happen. So what did happen? Well, having ignored me, they sought to register the title deed in their name, as they needed a land certificate to sell the chapel.